This podcast is with none other than Phil Shepherd, author of New Self, New World and Radical Wholeness. Phil is challenging the paradigm of Western thought-based intelligence and promoting embodied intelligence, which is what we can know by being in tune with the experience of the rest of the body, which does incorporate our brains and ultimately connects us to all of the phenomena in and around us in present time. So people who do yoga, meditation or do some other kind of mind-body practice, I'm sure will resonate very strongly with what Phil has to say about this. As essentially you'll be practicing how to come out of the head and into what people are understanding these days to be the present moment. So the present moment, I suppose, is the juncture at which we can go into Phil's work and philosophy. So Phil, thank you for giving me the opportunity and the space here, the lovely space in Basel, for inviting me to Basel and to this weekend workshop I'm about to embark on, and for sharing your wisdom, of course.
Such as it is.
Yeah. So welcome to the Mind Over Matter podcast, which is in conjunction with Healthy Souls.
It's such a pleasure to be here, David. Thank you.
Okay. Can you tell us a little bit about the road that's led you here? Now, I know a little bit about that from reading your book, a very important experience at the age of 18. Would you like to give us a little bit about that particular experience and how that's led to where you are now?
Yeah, the road that led me here is more literal than metaphoric. When I was a teenager, I had this acute sense of being raised in a story that wasn't reality-based. So it's like I watched the adults around me and, my sense was they were living in a sort of fantasy world and inviting me to join it. And I could literally feel my sense of myself, my sense of being located in the present, deteriorating, being compromised, being diminished by barriers and ways of thinking and modes of functioning that I was basically oblivious to, because what they track back to is my culture, is the story that my culture presented about what it means to be human. And I fought it as well as I could. And I guess something in me just realized that if I didn't leave my culture, what mattered most in my soul wouldn't survive. And so that brings us to the road. I went to England and bought a bicycle and headed off for Japan. And I cycled through Europe, through the Middle East, through India, and eventually through Japan. And there I'm a teenager on a bicycle, wide open to the experiences of the world around me. And on a bicycle, there's no barrier between you and the people in the street, the people you're riding beside. I had a race in the Middle East. There was a family on a cart being pulled by a horse, and this horse was gorgeous. I mean, you talk about an Arabian stallion. This thing was magnificent, and I think they found it preposterous that this guy on a bicycle could outrun the horse. And so we had this little race, and they're cheering, and I'm smiling and waving, and that sort of thing happens. And I absorbed so many different ways of understanding what it means to be human, of feeling what it means to be human. And the only time I felt culture shock was when I returned home. Mm-hmm. And there I am, I'm arriving back in the very neighborhood I grew up in as a child. And it, so much of it was arbitrary, and I came home with the ability to question the assumptions that were actually living in my body. And so that really began a journey that was supported and fostered by reading, by encountering other cultures in ways other than that journey on the bike, by theater. I've been in theater all my life, and the central question any actor faces is how to be fully present to the moment on stage. So all of the skills you acquire as an actor are transferable to any moment in your life.
It's an interesting way in to this thing I know there's listening, understand as being present and, coming more into the body. You're always really interesting because it's the way in through theatre and acting, which, from what I know again, was all sparked by you witnessing a no theatre production, the Japanese style, which provoked the journey over to Japan. So it's a unique and kind of fascinating way into this thing we call trying to find presence. Many other people speak of it, but get there via a different way.
Yeah, and there's no one right path. There's a great saying by Joseph Campbell, the guy who wrote about myths, that if the path ahead is clear, you're probably on someone else's. And I like that. There's no one road to presence. But I was particularly blessed by being so deeply informed by the grace and the presence and the at the time almost otherworldly attunement of no theater. So when I returned to Western theater and continued working as an actor, I carried questions with me that were rooted in the principles that guided no theater.
And what are them principles, and how does no theatre present itself so differently to Western theatre, for people who don't know?
No theater is not at all concerned with the psychology of the characters or presenting anything that looks realistic. So they're already inviting the audience into an experience where the imagination of the audience is as important as what is happening on stage. So, for example, you might have a 70-year-old man playing a 16-year-old girl, and he doesn't alter his voice. He doesn't pitch it higher or anything. He comes to that role with the whole of his being attuned to it and feeling it without giving any thought at all to how to present, right? So in Western theater, in Western culture, we're very concerned with presentation, and we learn at a very early age how to present ourselves to win the approval we so deeply need, how to win the smile or the hug. And we continue in presentation mode. And there's this form of theater that is stripped bare of presentation. And what moves, what moves the actor's arm in no theater is an intelligence that so deeply resides in the body, it attunes to the whole. So the actors, when I first saw no theater, I'd never seen an arm moved by this intelligence in the belly which is the Japanese concept of hara, which is their word for belly. I'd never seen a head turn and see from so deep within the body. So it really changed my life in very important ways.
For you to have had that experience when you first witnessed no theatre, I mean, because you're saying it as though that was the turning point. There must have been something in you though which recognised that in the theatre that you witnessed. Would I be right in saying that, or was it a completely new experience for you? Was your head completely turned, or do you think there was something already there?
I so deeply understood what was happening on that stage as I watched my first no play, and I was in tears at the beauty and the potency of it, and I was shaken to my core by exactly that, by what I attuned to, what I deeply recognized as something very familiar to me.
Which is saying something, because you are a part of the Western culture, which you've been able to kind of step outside of, look at and challenge. A bit like what you're saying, you put in your book about Newton kind of being able to remove himself from gravity itself in order to witness what it actually was. And in a way, that's kind of what you've done with this whole Western way of doing things and experiencing the world. You've been able to look at it and challenge it and see how it's made up, and to see that it's transitory and it's not all encompassing.
Yeah, and the patterns that drive our behavior, many of them have been illuminated for me by contrast to other cultures. Unlike Newton, who, I mean, it's just extraordinary to think of Newton watching an apple fall from a tree. And for the first time that we know of in human history, he questioned what everyone had witnessed from the moment of birth. You're born into gravity, you're conceived in gravity. It's just there as the medium in which you live. And his ability to question that is just genius. So the medium in which I live is my culture in a similar way. And it's been a wonderful and really deeply personal journey to feel within my body the barriers to my freedom, the patterns that bind my responsiveness, and to trace them back to our cultural assumptions and find ways of softening through them.
So the bicycle journey from England to Japan, were the experiences on that journey all part of becoming to understand what we're now calling embodied intelligence, even further? And if so, what were the kind of things that were happening? Because, I mean, we could do a podcast all on its own just about the man who cycled from England to Japan on a bicycle at age 18. I mean, that in itself is worthy of unpicking and finding information, but it's got this extra thing for you, which is it's informed and strengthened something that you felt intuitively at the beginning.
Yeah.
But I'm wondering how it might have done that. What exactly was happening on this journey? Where were you sleeping? What was going on? How did you survive?
There are several aspects that come to mind. One thing it did for me was I was deeply in my body all day long. I mean, basically, I woke up in the morning, had something to eat, got on my bike, and cycled until it started getting dark. And I slept outside almost all the way. I mean, occasionally I'd be in a youth hostel or something, but in general, I'd be cycling along, and dusk would come, and time to find a place to sleep. And here I am in a foreign country, not even knowing what's around the next bend. And one of the most important things I learned, and I think I learned it because my life depended on it, there was a guidance that would take me to where I could spend the night safely. And every single night I felt that guidance, and I followed it, and I was never disturbed in my sleep. No one ever knew I was there. Even when there was one time in Dubrovnik where I was in a I was actually, I was thinking of, wouldn't it be nice to have a shower and, clean up and all, but the hotels are so expensive, there was no way. So there was this meadow that a public path went through, and the meadow was just redolent with fragrance, and the grasses were high. So I was within, 15 meters of dogs going on the public path, and I hid my bike in the bushes, and I had a great sleep. So, but I felt that guidance. I learned in a deeply personal way that that aloneness is a fantasy, that I was never alone, that companionship, that guidance was always present with me.
Can you explain then to people listening who may be kind of new to your work and philosophy, if you like, what it is, how we can kind of sum up our usual way of approaching things in the Western mindset, the Western world, which is so at odds with this other way?
Yeah, the simplest way of framing that is that we live in our heads, and we think that's completely normal. That's where the brain is. Where else would you live? And it's actually an aberration. So we made a journey over our evolution of consciousness from thousands of years ago, when in the late Paleolithic, early Neolithic, 6000 BC, we in Europe experienced our thinking in the belly, and that began to rise in the body, and there's this great, around Homer's day, Homer in his writing uses this word phrene over and over in the original Greek. And phrene translates into English as mind and diaphragm. Mm-hmm. So it's not that they got their anatomy wrong, it's that they experienced their thinking in that region of the chest. And there is a translator who preserves that, Richmond Lattimore. Occasionally he'll have a character say something like, "The mind within my breast understands your words." Just gorgeous. And then, that movement paralleled our denunciation of the goddess and our new allegiance to the god. It paralleled the way our attention went from the earth to the sky, and the ascent of patriarchy. So patriarchy, the domination of society, and more particularly women by men, finds its original model in our relationship to the body. This intelligence in the head, which I personally experience it as the male pole of my intelligence. It's abstracting, it distances itself from things, it systemizes, it gains perspective, and that contained abstract thinking dominates the what I experience anyway is the female intelligence of my body, and more particularly of the intelligence in the pelvic bowl. So the intelligence in the pelvic bowl attunes to wholeness. It comes into felt relationship, whereas the thinking in the head wants known relationship. It wants to know what the world is and what everything is, and it feels safe when it goes that way. So what primarily distinguishes the place we've come to as a culture is that everything we do is in a top-down modality. It's all we trust, and it's pretty much all we know. We've so estranged ourselves from the body's intelligence that the journey back to the body is elusive. It's difficult. It's how do you do that? And how do you do that, especially in a world with so much that titillates and flatters the intelligence in the head?
It's all a follow-on, isn't it, from the intelligence of the head? You know, everything we see around us is kind of an extension of that in our culture. I think just to explain again for, you know, the people listening, if I can speak on your behalf here, it's not that the head intelligence, I'm assuming you're saying, is, you know, it's inherently wrong or bad. It's just that it's, you know, you're talking about the pole and where the intelligence has moved up from. We could see that as a kind of a spectrum, and it's not about the fact that head intelligence is inherently bad or wrong. It's just that we're only there at the minute, and it needs reconnecting, would you say, with where we once, you know, integration.
Yeah.
Because if you're talking it kind of evolutionarily, and there's other speakers who talk about this in the spiritual domain, if you like, Eckhart Tolle being one of them, amongst others, and they kind of talk about there was some kind of evolutionary necessity for that phenomenon to have happened. Can you maybe speak about that and maybe any future kind of necessity for any head-based intelligence once it's integrated back into, you know, the intelligence of further down?
Yeah, I mean, without, you know, and there was that, you know, necessary flexing of the male perspective, and without it, we wouldn't have Shakespeare, we wouldn't have Bach, you know, we wouldn't have the gorgeous cathedrals.
I think the ability to abstract as well, sorry to cut you off there, but just wanted to get this in, because kind of what I've seen you doing with your challenge of the culture is in a way, is it not maybe utilising an aspect of the culture in order to turn it back on itself, which is, you know, to step back from it and to be able to critically analyse it and see where it might be going wrong?
I love abstractions. I mean, I delight in that, and you know, as an author of books, that's probably highly evident. What has happened in our culture, though, and it happens so systematically, is that we have divided our thinking from our being, so that we've come to believe we can think more clearly when we shut down all the information below the neck and just go it alone in the head. All of my abstract thinking is joined to my being. Any abstraction that resonates through the body will be clarified and come into relationship in a different way than if it's hoarded in the cranium. So the challenge we face in reunifying the intelligence of the head with that of the pelvic bowl is how to reunite our thinking with our being. What does it mean to think with the whole of your being? And when that happens, it's a very different experience. any thought I have, I feel. It's like a note ringing through a bell. And any feeling I have, any sensation in the body, I recognize as a form of thought. So, in the Latin verb sentire, which gives us sensation in English, and that original Latin verb meant to think, to feel. And both of those senses still show up in English. So I could say, I sense this isn't safe, and I'm talking about a feeling. Or I could say, you're not making sense, and I'm talking about linear thought, abstraction. So thinking and being, we still recognize in that word that relationship, but we have rent them asunder, and deliberately. I mean, you look at what the public school system does to kids, and it sits them at a desk and it stifles the body's energy. And if you can't suppress your body's energy, you're going to get in trouble. If you suppress the body's energy, you are suppressing the body's intelligence. And meanwhile, we are filling our head with the right answers. And the more we can fill our head with the right answers, the more successful we'll be. So that divide is systematically reinforced in us.
Well, thank you for that, because I think it was important to kind of let people know who are new to your work that it's not anti-West or anti-headist or anti-intellect. It's about integration, isn't it?
And what I might add to that is that I think we are at the threshold in terms of the larger picture of the evolution of our consciousness, where until now we have experienced our thinking as a localized phenomenon. We experienced it in the belly, in the late Paleolithic, in the chest in Homer's day, and since Plato we've experienced it in the head. And I think where we need to move is into an integration of our intelligence. So, our intelligence is felt through the whole of the body, and it's these poles of the male pole of the head and the female pole of the belly are in unity, are in constant exchange, and it's like an axis of intelligence rather than a localized phenomenon. And in the same way that a bar magnet holds a field around it, that axis of intelligence holds a field and attunes to a field that holds it.
Thank you for that. It kind of makes it clearer. And this coming back into, the balance between head, pelvic bowl, male, female. I mean, I can see personally from my journey, and I'm sure I can speak for a lot of other people here, I could say, my journey up until like my mid-20s, maybe late 20s, was classically trained in, Western culture, shall we say. I'd got 7 years worth of university education in me by that point, gone through the schooling system, absorbed all of, the Western ways of approaching the world through the head. And I loved thinking. I used to say it to myself, I loved thinking. I at the time thinking was where it was at. I'd love to be off in thought, I'd love to daydream, I'd love to apply thought to things, to be able to fix things. It's got downsides, and I know that from my own personal journey. I got to a point mid to late 20s where, my life was just completely upside down in terms of, where I was in my health and my being, and, a long period of distress and kind of mental ill health, really. And so for me, the way out of that, coincidentally, and it is kind of why I come to your work, as I'm guessing it is for a lot of other people, and why they take the path they do. It was a path of coming down from the head, and still is. It still is for me. It's been so ingrained in me, to use the head for so many, as a kind of one size fits all approach. And my journey now is all about can I come down from there, and that results in a lot of the activity that I do these days. So for people listening who are on a similar journey, can you maybe explain how what you do and what your philosophy can bring to those also wanting to come from the head and back into a place of integration between head and, you call it the pelvic bowl, there's also the heart in there.
Yeah, I don't think there's any possibility of an integration between the head and the pelvic bowl, and of course the heart, without an integration with the present. So we've been trained and taught to think of our intelligence as it's like a computer in the head, as though everything it needed were there, all the programming were there. It just needs to get input from the world, and it will process that, and that is debilitating as a metaphor for our intelligence. So that journey from the head back into the body is not a journey about learning how to listen to the body. Because which is what a lot of embodiment gravitates towards, listen to the body. And it's great listening to the body. It's, especially in circumstances of injury, that close attention to the body is really necessary. But the metaphor, listen to your body, basically says, well, your body's in the room next door, and there's a wall separating you from it. And the best you can do is put your ear to the wall and find out what's going on the other side. So it's a metaphor that means well and is actually ultimately disabling. It's reinforcing the very paradigm that it purports to help us overcome. Mm-hmm. So my work is about listening to the world through the body. And I really experience the body and the body's intelligence as a resonator, like a bell. And what happens in our culture is the bell loses its resonance. It's like our bodies are stuffed full of doubts and tensions and concerns, and it's like you take a bell and you stuff it full of cotton balls, and then you go to ring it and it doesn't ring. Now when that happens, when the bell loses its resonance, all you can do is guide yourself. There is no intelligence, there is no mindful present to attune to. If you can't feel it, it doesn't exist. If your body is consolidated with tensions and neglect, then you won't feel it. And then returning to the body, being able to listen to the world through the body, will be impossible until you discover those consolidations, those shadows of neglect, and integrate them and recover the spaciousness within the body that allows you to feel all the world there.
So I think in the book you refer to that as the energies that resist integration. And these things, you list 7 things, so amongst them, and maybe a few more, is emotions, ideas, beliefs, muscle patterns, warnings, speech, centers of intelligence, the energy of the present, and vigilance. Could you maybe speak about how a few of those things, present themselves as the energies that resist integration? Shall we go with, say, I think speech is a good one, because everybody is speaking all of the time, and also our emotions, because it ties in quite nicely with some of the work that I do in my place of work, the Brink Recovery Social Enterprise in Liverpool, and what lots of other people I know are doing, which is working with those emotional resistances, doing some work to try and free them. So can you maybe speak about a few of those things and how they present as resistance?
Yeah, in moving towards wholeness, you have to let go of any notions about fixing your problems or getting rid of bad thoughts. Or the only thing that will move you towards wholeness is integration. And it's that thing, that wholeness has no boundary. And so, you're trying to get rid of bad thoughts. Where do you put them? They're still, they're still there, a part of your being, until they've been integrated. And that, there's an image that appears on the cover of Radical Wholeness that I keep coming back to as a metaphor for integration. And that's the murmuration of starlings.
Oh, starlings, sorry, yeah.
Yeah. So you get 250,000 birds flying in this. It's almost like an organism in the sky, and it ripples and it elongates and it condenses. And if people listening to this podcast don't know what a murmuration of starlings is, go to YouTube and Google or input murmuration. And my gosh, it's a sight to behold. So if you imagine a lone starling separated from the murmuration, and then it finds its way back, the movement of that starling will be harmonized by the whole. And the harmony of the whole will be slightly attuned by the inclusion of that other starling. So in a similar way, we have these energies in the body. We have emotions that aren't integrated. We have ideas that aren't integrated. We have muscle patterns that aren't integrated. And it's like that lone starling. We hold these things away from our being because we can't afford to integrate them at the time. And that's life. As a child, the world is overwhelming and tragedy comes. And how do you withstand integrating an overwhelming world? And so we park these things in the body, and they sit there and wait until we grow into ourselves a bit, and we grow our roots, and we gather a foundation, and then the time comes, okay, you're ready to integrate it. And that really, those unintegrated energies I think of as orphans, and they are alone, and what they need is to be loved. They need to be accepted unconditionally.
Acceptance was the word that comes to mind for me as well.
And then you can feel the energy in the body, and I do this in my work, and especially in my facilitators trainings, to bring that energy through the body to actually come in contact with that intelligence of your being, which resides in the pelvic bowl, and you'll feel it integrate. And then you're opening that space within the body, and suddenly you're not alone because the whole world is living through you.
An experience I had with that recently was coming here on the plane, well, 2 planes, from Liverpool to Munich to Basel, and a whole host of stressful situations in the airport. They kind of singled me out, as the guy that needs to be checked out and stuff like that in airports for some reason. Don't know what it is, but stuff like that. And Am I getting on time to where boarding is? Anyway, sitting on the plane, after all of that, there was just this kind of stress, anxiety, this my blood was pulsing. I mean, thankfully, I was on my way to Basel to meet Phil Shepherd and talk about Radical Wholeness, because that was the provocation to go, okay, so I'm feeling this. What's the answer in this situation? And it was just that. It was just let it be there. Yeah. And feel it even more than what you usually would, rather than trying to see how I could fix it, see how I could get rid of it, and all that kind of stuff. So is that what you mean when you're talking about integrating a few of these energetic resistances?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a basic principle. You can't be fully present until you're willing to fully feel everything you're feeling. Right? If there are things you're not allowed to feel because of whatever the circumstance might be, that will be a shadow that binds up your energy and keeps you from being fully present. Once you're able to fully feel everything you're feeling, you have a choice to recognize that as energy and to allow that energy to settle down in the body. And it's a choice in our culture we don't realize we have. We try to talk ourselves out of something. We try to assure ourselves. So it's like we're trying to appease our thoughts with other thoughts, and the body is not going to be fooled. But what the body responds to is that softening of the energy and allowing it to drop down and come back home. So in terms of these two poles of our intelligence in the head and the pelvic bowl, home for me is the pelvic bowl. The head is not home. I'm in exile if I'm living in my head, but I can be at rest in the pelvic bowl, and the nature of the intelligence in the pelvic bowl is inclusive, as the nature of the intelligence in the head is exclusive. So to be at rest there is to be able to include the whole of my intelligence.
Can you kind of elaborate a bit on the pelvic bowl and when you're talking about resting there? Because when I read it in the book, I could only, again, think about that kind of abstractly, and I didn't really get what you meant by it until, coincidentally, a practice in Qigong kind of encouraged me to go there, resting in the perineum and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But for people, again, unaware, what do you mean when you say resting in the pelvic bowl, and where is the pelvic bowl, and what does that mean?
Yeah. So if you're familiar with a skeleton, and there's the spine coming down, and then there are the bones of the pelvis. Mm-hmm. That's basically the pelvic bowl. And coming to rest in the pelvic bowl, we are so used to enclosing our awareness in the head. And we've even bought into the fallacy that you can only be aware of the world from the head. Because, well, we see from there and hear from there, and, well, where else would we notice the world from? And other cultures show us that you can be aware of the world from deep, deep within the body. So I can feel the sights of the world from the pelvic floor, from the perineum. I can feel the sounds of the world from there. And I can only do that when the center of my awareness drops down through the body and arrives on the perineum and comes to rest there. And when it does, a whole new world is unveiled. The world I thought was reality when I was in my head, as I drop down and come to rest on my perineum, transforms into something very different.
I can vouch for that. I mean, I've been experimenting with that since reading it in your work and some practice in qigong, and the only way I can describe it, it's like stuff starts to go into like HD Technicolor or something. It's like everything just comes alive a little bit more. It's like it's a bit two-dimensional until you go there. So
yeah, and in your head, I mean, the intelligence in the head excels at analysis, and the word analysis means to break to pieces. So to live in the head, you see objects. It's an objectified world, and different objects are separate from other objects. And as you drop down and come to rest in the perineum, that sense of independent objects melts into a field in which everything is part of a felt whole and manifests that whole at the same time.
It's funny, you know, the axis that you talk about with, you know, the opposite to the head being in the pelvic bowl, you know, because it corresponds with a lot of Eastern philosophy, Chinese especially, who have as the three dantians. I don't know if you heard of it. The dantian in the pelvic bowl, and then the heart space, and then the head, which correspond also with the yogic chakras as well. So again, you know, when you've gone on your travels to the East in search of no theatre and this hankering for Japanese culture, did any of these Eastern places impress these philosophies I just mentioned on you? Are you familiar with these other kind of practices? Or have you kind of arrived at the same place but unaware of them and from a different angle?
Both have happened. Both. My experience has found language in other practices. You know, and I you know, there's an African tribe, the Anglo-Ewe, who don't have a word for sense, but the closest they have is a word sesilalame. And sesilalame means feel at flesh inside. And they feel the world through their bodies. And I'd done that for years, and finally here's a culture that has language for it and that understands it, and that was brilliant. And then, you know, on the other hand, there are terms, you know, especially in Zen, which is deeply influential in no theater, that bring aspects of the world into a new clarity for me, where it's almost like it's naming something vaguely familiar that I'm bent on remembering.
So again, this balance, we're talking about the balance, you know, head, pelvic bowl, Western, Eastern, you know, head intelligence, body intelligence,
world intelligence, self-intelligence.
Yeah. How can we explain to other people without becoming too abstract? Because this is what I do, you see. You know, I try to tell someone and I end up in the head.
Yeah. Everyone has had a gut feeling, I think, right? And that's that intelligence at work. People experience it all the time, and they have learned to doubt it and mistrust it. So there's a guy, John Coates, who's done a lot of research about what the body knows is distinct from what we consciously know. And you know, it turns out that the body knows 1,000,000 times more information than the head. 1,000,000 times more. And John Coates did this research where he he'd been a stock trader, high frequency stock trader, and then became a neuroscientist, and then came back to the to the trading floor to look into a phenomenon that he'd encountered where sometimes he would make a trade and he would know this is a winner, and he was right. And what's that about? And so he got a group of traders, and he asked them for a conscious assessment of the risk of a trade, of how well they thought it would do. And he also monitored the body with cortisol responses and things like that. So he'd gauge how the body felt about it. And when you look at the conscious assessment opposite what the body knows, the body mapped almost directly onto the trade. The body knew exactly what the risk was. And the conscious assessment was all over the place. There was no correlation. So then he thought, well, if the body really knows that much more clearly, and this is, I mean, talk about abstract. I don't think you can get more abstract than high frequency trading in the stock market. So we got another group of traders and asked them intermittently what they thought their heart rate was. And I imagine he did it by texting. What's your heart rate now? And they answer, and they were all wearing a heart rate monitor that they couldn't read. So they were guessing at their heart rate. The traders who were most in touch with their heart rate in the previous year had done significantly more successful trades than the ones who weren't in touch with the body. So Coates speaks of the body as a parabolic reflector. It attunes to the world. It is picking up signals we can't possibly be aware of consciously. And part of the challenge is to wean ourselves away from that 1/1,000,000th of our intelligence that wants to doubt what the body knows, and gently pay closer attention to what the body feels. So, sometimes you meet someone and you have a really uneasy feeling, and that's irrational, or you talk yourself out of that. But there's a reason for that.
Can that not be also based on, prior experience, and in a sense, you kind of overlapping that prior experience onto an innocent bystander kind of thing?
Absolutely. So that's, we spoke of unintegrated energies, and unintegrated energies are always reactive. Whether they're ideas, whether they're emotions, they live in a reactive state. So absolutely you can be reactive, but the more integrated those energies become, the more the body's intelligence moves from being white noise to pure signal.
Unless, fear-based, would you say? Because I find it, maybe it can be fear based on previous, which is giving me wrong signals about maybe a person or experience. I don't know, what's your take on that?
Yeah, fear can be a real thing. There was a story in a magazine about a woman who was driving along the highway and needed a rest stop, and she pulled off and just felt uneasy about it, like fearful, and drove on. And later she read in the paper that a woman had been murdered at that rest stop that night. So we attune to the world, our bodies attune to the world in ways that cannot be rationally explained. And the more we open to what is resonating through the body, the more we take those unintegrated energies and bring them down, I think the more clearly we read the world. And when you go back to our Paleolithic ancestors, they attuned to the world in ways we can't even imagine. I mean, they, you know, in quote marks, they spoke with plants. We've got this bizarre notion that, you know, these herbal medicines that Aboriginal cultures are aware of, hundreds of them, that they got them through trial and error, because that's all we know is top down. But it's absurd. I mean, you think, okay, John's got a headache. What plant haven't we tried for a headache? Well, here's one. Here, John, eat this. Oh no, John died. Does anyone else have a headache? Because we have another 347 plants to test for headache. I mean, it's absurd. But there's research. Stephen Herod Buchner and Monica Gagliano, who's an bona fide hardcore scientist, has discovered ways in which plants communicate with each other, like through sound.
Massively, yeah.
Yeah,
and the network underneath as well.
Yeah, absolutely. The wood wide web.
Yeah.
So that our bodies, once they return to the present, once the shadows of neglect have been integrated, will attune to reality in ways that our conscious minds will doubt and will mistrust, but will actually be more deeply connected with the living truth of the moment than this could possibly achieve.
I think attunement is one of the big words that come from your book that kind of, again, resonates so strongly with myself. And you give plenty of examples of how attunement manifests, you know, especially in the animal kingdom or even the insect kingdom. And you mentioned that example about the ants that are kind of predicting weather in some cases. You know, when there's going to be some really serious weather. Someone done a study, didn't he? Deborah Gordon.
Yeah.
And, you know, at the onset of some really bad weather, they kind of they built a turret so that water would be kept away from the living quarters.
Wouldn't flood the colony. Exactly, yeah.
And
one of the interesting things about that is that ants, the worker ants, only live for a year. So the ants building the turret weren't around last season when the monsoons came.
Yeah.
Right? It's not that they experienced it and said, oh,
yeah,
we know what's happening this time.
How are they getting that information?
Yeah, exactly.
And, you know, there's just so much in that. But, of course, where they're getting their information from is, you would call it a field. You know, it's the field of information. And I think you describe it when you describe what wholeness is, which is the all-inclusive medium within which every process affects every other. So that being a field is something that once you're connected through the body, you have access to all of that information. Would that be a fair way to put it?
Yeah, so the strength of the intelligence in the head is that it can gain perspective. Now, perspective requires distance. You don't have perspective in the middle of something. You have to step back from it. So as we retreat, in effect, to that intelligence in the head, we can feel a distance between ourselves and the world and gain perspective on it. But the perspective only comes into its full value when it's integrated. And that happens through the body. So, you know, the attunement, the world is always running through the body, whether we notice it or not. The reality in which we live is one in which everything affects everything else. And so there are ways in which we are picking up information from the world that we are unaware of consciously, but that we can feel.
Yeah.
So it's like the present itself. You can't know the present. It's never been here before. It's always changing. There's no way you can know something that is without a border. but you can feel it. And that's what the body brings us to, the ability to feel this reality in which we are living.
So it's like, in a way, we're kind of, it's coming in and out of us sometimes, even though we're saying that it's not, or that we're not giving any credence to it. You know, it's kind of happening on some level anyway. In some cases, would that be? Would that be fair to say?
I mean, the way I think of it,
because we're not disconnected completely, are we? You know, we are living connected to everything else, whether we want to kind of logically argue against that fact.
Yeah, and I don't think you can logically argue against it, because you'd be overturning the whole of quantum mechanics in order to make that argument.
That's what's ironic, actually, that being connected to everything else can actually be described logically.
Absolutely.
You know, if you want to strip everything down in terms of how the air comes into our lungs, and you know how, you know, we can't live without food, and it's easy to see when you want to approach it like that, actually, isn't it?
Yeah. The body is always turning the world into itself, and is always turning itself into the world. You know, that's just the nature of the body, and we can believe we're disconnected, which you know, the more relentlessly you ensconce yourself in the head, the more it will be obvious to you that you are alone in the world. But it's a fantasy. It's a disconnected fantasy. Wholeness is inescapable. I mean, where would you go? Wherever, you know, the whole of the cosmos is held in wholeness. So we can't escape wholeness. We are always in wholeness, held in wholeness, but we can desensitize ourselves to it. That's what systematically happens in our culture, to the point where, you know, we have forgotten largely what it means to speak from the wholeness of your being, or listen from the wholeness of your being. We've lost the ability to feel the self in its wholeness, or to feel the present in its wholeness. Well, if you're not feeling the present in its wholeness, you're not feeling the present, because wholeness is all it is. The present doesn't exist independent of that quality.
You mentioned again speaking, and it's something, again, I personally, I find myself quite often in the presentation mode, as you call it. It's good that I'm a bit more aware of it these days, to the point where I kind of actually feel the energy disappearing, you know, and just coming to roundabout here. I'm aware of it now, but could you kind of speak around that subject, about this idea of speaking, you know, not from an embodied place, what that looks like, and what speaking from embodiment looks like, and how we can do that, you know, how we can incorporate that in our speech.
It really, for me, comes back to the breath. So either the whole of the body is available to the breath, or only part of the body is available to the breath. Well, if only part of the body is available to the breath, it's because in some way you have prohibited certain feelings. You're not allowed, because breath flushes out feeling. Right. As you release the body to the breath, you're releasing the body to sensation. And what happens is we shut the body down. I can close off my legs to the breath and my voice changes a bit. I can close off my belly to the breath. I can shut down my breath, kind of going up through the body, until all that's left of my voice is up here. And my body's not available to it. And why would I want it to be? But it's hard to listen to, because my voice isn't grounded in my being. And so the issue of breath isn't one of breathing properly, because I don't think there is such a thing. I think every moment calls forth a slightly different breath. But the issue for me is just one of wholeness. Is the whole of your body available to the breath? And I mean, you know, it may sound metaphoric, but I can feel the breath in the soles of my feet. I can feel the breath in my hips. I can feel the breath run up my spine. I can feel the breath in the top of my head. The body is like a balloon that slightly dilates with the in-breath and slightly releases with the out-breath.
See, I totally believe you there. You know, you've got quite a theatrical way of putting that, which, do you think that's informed by your work in theatre, and do you think that gives you an ability to kind of describe it that way, or is that literal what you're saying there about how you can feel the breath and where?
Both. So it really is literal. I mean, really, you can put your hand on my thigh and feel the breath there, because we're 65% water. So if the body is released into its wholeness, the breath is a wave that travels through the whole of it, just the way a wave would travel across the surface of a pond. So it's you know, it is a literal thing in that sense, but it's also something that was necessary as an actor in theater. If there's not the spaciousness in my body for the whole of the breath, then the impact of my performance will be diminished. And that's a big thing. So when we speak, we tend to control what we're saying and how we're saying it. Do
you think that's wrapped up in we're also while we're speaking worrying about how we might be perceived?
Exactly. I think it primarily comes to that, because we basically understand that when you speak, everything that the breath touches is revealed on the voice. Well, then we tend not to let the breath touch certain things, and we present ourselves in the way that we feel is correct for this situation. And then what is heard in the voice is that we're hiding. So you can't hide the hiding. And then, when you speak, it's such a different thing to allow the voice to arise out of the body without an expectation of how it should sound. So there's a theater director, Michael Langham, whose advice to actors was, begin speaking a line without knowing where it will take you. And that's gorgeous. But when we start talking, we've got that sense of exactly where this sentence should take us, and we don't release the whole of the body to its sensitivity, which might take us somewhere completely different.
Yeah, it's kind of that fear of not knowing where it's going to go or take us, and wanting to have some kind of control on that as well. But I think it's also tied in with, we believe in the self as a boundaried entity, as a concept. And so if we believe in that and we're attached to that, we're going to feel like we need to preserve it in some way.
And defend it.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So, yeah.
Our whole culture upholds the idea of independence, that we're all independent, and that, my chair is independent from the floor, and independence in a way is the fantasy around which our culture has gathered itself. And our homes are independent, and our cars are independent, and we walk down the street in independence rather than in relationship. But independence is only a fantasy. There's no such thing. There's not one example of independence in the whole of the cosmos. Everything affects everything. Everything relates to everything. And so to live your life in a way that is clinging to that fantasy is ultimately to hold on to hopes and beliefs and aspirations that belonged to the mythological tyrant. And Joseph Campbell talked about the tyrant as the man of self-achieved independence. And that phrase could double as the American dream.
Well, it's relevant for a lot of things. I know you say an American dream and it's American based, but you know, I see enough of it UK and everywhere else.
Oh yeah.
Really, you know, the ascent of the individual, and it's the age of the individual in a way.
The age of the selfie, the age of the personal rights. I mean, you can't sustain personal rights without coupling them with personal responsibilities. But responsibility brings us into relationship, and we don't want that. We want our rights, and it leaves us in isolation. And then we wonder why we feel alone and alienated in this world when that contraction from relationship can have no other consequence.
It's quite paradoxical, isn't it? It's in one sense, understanding ourselves as a boundaried self, you know, an individual, and on the back of that there has come some good strides forward made in terms of welfare for people, individuals, as a result of that. But there's a downside, as you quite clearly.
Yeah, I mean, I think independence is a fantasy, but individuality is clearly a reality. I mean, I'm an individual, you're an individual, but individuality doesn't stand apart from the world. Individuality is sustained by and upheld by the currents of the world.
Because your or my experiences from moment to moment are completely unique.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and I think you put that again when you were talking about the energies of resistance. The way they manifest from person to person is completely unique. So if anything, it upholds even further, you know, the notion of individuality.
Yeah.
Okay, so this podcast is for mind over matter, and it's also in conjunction with something else I do call Healthy Souls. And for the people listening to this, we're in a kind of extended community of well-being, if you like. Speaking to you, reading your book, taking your workshop is all part of this well-being. You know, well-being in inverted commas these days. It's a big deal, and there are various ways that people are strenuously striving towards achieving well-being. You know, what does well-being mean to you?
I don't think true well-being can coexist with division. So we live in such a binary culture that we have compartmentalized parts of ourselves. Well, there's the part of me that wants to be physically fit, and then there's a part of me that likes to do crossword puzzles and who knows what, right? And I can be analytical or I can feel from my heart, but they don't belong together. And so we've got these compartmentalized realms of our lives that impair our wholeness. And the word health and the word wholeness come from the same Latin root. So to me, as you grow into your wholeness, you grow into a sensitivity that invites well-being, that guides you to well-being, that we are an addictive culture, and I think at the core of many addictions is an emptiness inside, where we have disconnected from our being because our life depended on it very often, and that that hole needs to be filled, and it needs to be filled with shopping or with alcohol or with drugs or whatever the addiction may be. Fitness, can be an addiction, and until that divide between our thinking and our being is healed, and we soften into wholeness, I think our ability to experience well-being will be diminished.
So how does that manifest for you in decision making when it comes to food, your breakfast time, caffeine intake, alcohol, exercise? Because, there's lots of people, and I've been here myself, all my hand up. I'd like to have thought at some point, I'm ticking all these boxes, I'm doing that right, I'm doing that right, I'm doing that right. I'm managing my health and well-being quite well here. For you, how does this manifest in your decisions towards those things? Food especially, because I think a lot of the people listening have got an interest in food, and they come to our page, Healthy Souls Community, to get some information and advice on food, and to our events. So how does that manifest for you with those kinds of decisions?
Yeah, I mean, there's so much information about food that is so valuable. And I take it in, and it informs me. I like Michael Pollan's really simple, eat real food, mostly vegetables, not too much, something like that. But I really find imposing top-down decisions on my body is injurious. It hurts.
The judgment aspect.
The judgment, the shame, the I should eat this and not that, and I just don't tend to go there. So I'll drop down to my body and feel what it longs for, feel what it hungers for, feel, as truly as I can, when I'm hungry and when I'm not, and how to find the peace in the body's energy that allows me to be nourished by the present, rather than seeking substitute nourishment in the world around me.
Yeah, I've been reading quite a bit about that in Feldenkrais, some of his work, and he's talking about conflicting motivations and how, certain kinds of needs, people are trying to fill a lot of the time needs with things that don't fill that need. The motivations are conflicting inside. So comfort eating, is people are trying to fulfill a need that food will never. Will never touch, and a variety of other activities.
Rather than putting food in your belly, what if you let the breath there? Right? So we hold so much tension in the gut that we've desensitized it. And to allow the breath to drop into there is to allow this wave of replenishment to come to your being. And it really brings you to a place, I find anyway, of balance, where that need to diet, or the shame of eating the wrong thing, or whatever it might be, all the top-down implementations, and even a workout, I should go for a run, which is very different from feeling in the body the yearning to move and to answer that.
I think it can get a bit difficult to take yourself away from the judgment and the blame and the shoulds and should nots when there's a condition you're trying to heal, which is being impacted directly from maybe foods that you've been used to up until that point. So if for example, a certain food causes something in you, like inflammation in your bowel, or a rash of some kind, and you kind of find yourself keep going to that food, or if it's sugar, that's feeding all this bad bacteria in your stomach, if you buy into that, it can be difficult to negotiate your way away from the judgments of the self when you fall back into a way of eating which may be doing you harm?
Oh, it absolutely. Oh, absolutely. And especially, it's especially difficult in our environment, which tends to be static, and our environment grows stale. When you used to live in the forest, it was changing every day. Now we live in our homes, and it doesn't change. And it's like Bruce Alexander did research on addiction with Rat Park. I don't know if you know of that.
I do, very much.
So where the rats had a lively environment, and they had no addiction
to fill up with anything. Untoward. Yeah.
But I think there's this. I think there's this quality, this reckoning, that is not easy, but is possible and necessary, of being gentle on yourself and bringing love to parts of yourself that are starving for it. Mm. And how to do that, and it's not easy. It's a lifetime's work in many cases, but it's possible, and I don't know of any journey that's more important.
Yeah. I think one other place I wanted to kind of take this interview, I'm from Liverpool and played football for a long time. It's a big passion of mine. I support Liverpool FC, still very passionately these days, as do a lot of the people I know, whether it's Liverpool or Everton. And so football is not just part of English culture, but, definitely in Liverpool, it's a big thing. And I kind of moved away from it about 18, 19, when a couple of things didn't go my way, didn't make it into the final selection of the England schoolboys under 18, and I think I carried a bit of pain from that, and moved away from football and got into a different lifestyle. But I've come back to it on a few occasions, and without it now, I realised that I'm missing something, and I kind of trivialised football. But when I think of it, on a deeper level, what football is and what people get from not just football, but from sport, movement, and for me, without kind of making football sound too pretentious from how people usually understand it, but also trying to make a link for the people back home listening. Football, for me, I think the reason why I got so much from it was because I mentioned earlier I was a thinker, thought too much. There was no place for thinking while in the game.
It's a relief.
So what are your thoughts on not just football, but sports in general and its place in society and in our culture, in our Western culture, and how does that fit with your understanding of everything else?
Yeah, you see, I think that state that an athlete finds of being in the zone is a universally understood state of harmony. And that is a fully embodied state that is so finely attuned to the world around. So
massively.
Yeah, and you're not in charge. There's nothing top down about it, right? It's like the world is almost in slow motion, and you just feel everything and are guided in every movement. Well, the guidance that we find in sport, we can translate into our lives. The same guidance is there. And I think sport is sport is about relationships. Sport is about being present with the whole of your being, to whether it's a tennis ball or a football. It doesn't matter. And it's maybe, as you say, it's maybe the one activity where you learn experientially that it is defeating to try to outthink your situation. That without the body's intelligence, you'll never make a go of it.
I think like the rise of sport, certainly football, in terms of how how massive it is now, and widely followed, and how much money's in the game purely on the basis of how much people enjoy it and love it. For me, it kind of seems like, without knowing it, it's like the Western culture's own kind of antidote or medication, if you like, to the way we're usually going about our business. It's like we've found something without knowing or thinking about it, something which kind of takes the edge off a bit, and is, you know, maybe a reason why it is so dominant and prevalent in our society.
Yeah.
So, you know, like, humans naturally will want to engage in something which you know, takes the edge off a bit.
Yeah, and I am, you know, as you say that, I'm thinking of sailing, and I'm thinking of skiing and tennis, and it's true of all those sports.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Okay, lastly, so as I say, I've come all the way here from Liverpool, and we're probably going to have a lot of listeners in Liverpool, and for anyone listening, I'm really hoping to get Phil over to our place sometime this year. So we're working on that. Can you give us an understanding of, when I say the word Liverpool to you, I mean, it conjures up. I'll just carry on with that. When I say Liverpool to you, what immediately comes to mind for you? And maybe could you give a little something for the people at home you may be coming to see soon?
Liverpool conjures so much, and of course, how could I avoid the Beatles in that? Because I know you can't, and you know, as I was growing up as a teenager, they were. I saw the Beatles.
Did you?
Live in Toronto? Yeah. But
that's rare. I don't think I've met many people who've saw
Oh
it.
yeah, I was there. I loved it. Boy, there's something. There's something, you know, in my, and I've never been to Liverpool. I've been to other places in England, but never Liverpool. But there's a proud history there, and there's a sense, for me anyway, of people somehow knowing how to come together. Not all the time, but
Spot
it
on.
really, it
Right.
really feels that way to me.
Yeah, there's countless examples of that, and you've definitely hit on something there that I think people will relate and respond to. Definitely, it's a big part of us. So
I look forward to experiencing that for myself.
oh yeah, you'll love it. You'll love it.
Yeah.
Well, for now, I think I'd like to conclude the conversation, and once again, just thank you for, you know, giving me the space to do such a thing, and the opportunity to find a few more things out from you in person, which you can get so much from the book, but, you know, in person it's a lot different. So a big thank you for that, and also I've got so much more to look forward to with the rest of the weekend. So thank you for your presence, your wisdom, your time, your energy, and we hope to see you again soon.
I hope to see you in Liverpool again. Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you, David.
Nice one.